Okay, and so tonight I'm just thrilled that we have Charles Eisenstein with us. And Charles, he's a visionary, and he actually is outlining a vision of the future, and that is so important. We need visionaries. We need people that actually carry things out, but we really need the visionaries. And reading Charles' books, I'm always just like, this is a really good vision of the future. And we need to have vision. It really helps to help us heading towards those end goals. And there's that quote, "The better world we all know is possible." The better world we all know is possible. We all know it in our hearts that it could be way better than this. And so Charles will come up and talk more about his angle and the better world we all know is possible. Oh, and come up here, Charles. We need you up here for this part. Okay, so. And we tried to keep this talk a secret because we didn't want it to get overcrowded. But no. Charles, we'd like to present you with one of the Global Earth Repair Heroes and Heroine award from our conference. And so we saved this till now, but we've handed a few other out, but you certainly deserve one. So let's give him a big hand.
That's very sweet. Thank you, Skeeter. There are many people in this audience who deserve this award a lot more than I do, because, and I'm not being modest here. I'm being accurate, because, I'm a public speaker. I'm an author. Lots of people are receiving the work that I do, so I'm well known, and people are coming up to me often and saying, "Thank you for your work, and it had this effect on my life," et cetera, et cetera. And so I have some kind of encouragement to do what I'm doing. I'm getting thanks. I'm getting celebration. So it makes it a lot easier to do my work, compared to people who are having their hands in the soil and doing these quixotic projects that seem naive and totally impractical and impossible, or that are enacting invisible service and love to a child, to a sick person, to a prisoner on death row, to some being on this world that has been forgotten and neglected and needs love and needs service. And those people don't get awards. They don't get recognition. Sometimes they don't even get thanks. So, yeah, I want to include all of them in this lovely little heart award. Those are the people who are holding the world together so that the folks doing the big visible stuff can even do that. A lot of the things that need to be done today don't have the reward of you get to think that you're saving the world by doing it. Some of them do fit into a story of this is going to save the world. You can, if you have a worldview that says that atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases are going to destroy the world, and my reforestation project or my beaver reintroduction project or my regenerative farm is going to contribute to drawing down carbon, so I'm part of saving the world. Like, sometimes you can fit it into a save the world narrative, but what about if you are working with homeless people, or with veterans who have PTSD, or with addicts, or with sea turtles, or with the man at the conference who's trying to get people out of prison who are there for plants, who are serving lengthy sentences for marijuana and are still languishing in jail. How is that contributing to drawdown? How is that saving the world? People who do that work, which their heart calls them to do, don't get the benefit of thinking that they're part of Team Save the World. But there's a part of us that knows that they actually are part of that team. That understands that the political climate and the social climate and the economic climate are linked to the global climate. That a society that is locking people up and marginalizing and diminishing and dehumanizing people is also going to treat nature the same way, to make it into a thing, to treat it as something less than sacred. And that by doing any work that restores sacredness to any being, we are doing the same work and contributing to the field of seeing the whole world that way and treating the whole world that way, and especially those who are doing it thanklessly. That takes courage. And so those people are contributing to a field of courage, to a rising of courage that we really need right now. Part of the message that I'm serving here is that the ecological crisis that we call climate change, the cause of it is everything. As I was conceiving this book that I wrote a book called Climate: A New Story, of which there are no copies in the hall. Yeah, I kind of forgot that part. However, the book does exist. And while I was writing it, I had a conversation. I visited a very prominent environmental activist. Environmental fundraisers raised hundreds of millions for various environmental causes, and his thing now is climate change. And I was talking to him about some of my ideas. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I might have been talking to him about my dawning understanding of the whales and their role in the physiology of this earth. Like, it's not just, some cute factoid that they communicate with each other over hundreds of miles and form an unbroken global web of communication, like a global mind or an oceanic mind, that they're always in communication with each other like neurons in a brain, that their songs are not just like the robotic calls of an animal, although no animal actually is like that, but that they are unfathomably complex, and they evolve over time, and they gain variations, and then sometimes they go out of style and new songs are created and spread among the whale culture. There's just barely enough of them today to maintain that web of connectivity compared to the number of whales there used to be before commercial whaling got started. Okay, I was telling him about this, and maybe, I don't think this was part of the conversation, but, whales are also really important for the health of the ocean. We tend to think of the dominant model of the planet is I call it a geomechanical model that says that life thrives where geophysical conditions are conducive to life. So there are these ocean currents that are driven by the spin of the Earth and the temperature differential between the equator and the poles, and this drives these currents. And in some places, the currents upwell, deep water comes up to the surface, bringing all kinds of nutrients there, and life thrives there. And in places where there's no layer mixing, then life does not thrive there. So it needs layer mixing and nutrients and so forth. Well, I read this study, this research, using my normal research method, which is first decide what's true and then go look for the evidence. So I'm like, I know, like, so I'm like, okay, what I decide is true is that Earth is alive and all of its species are part of the physiology. So whales are an organ of life, of a living world. So looking like oriented toward this, I came across this research that says that actually up to 50% of the layer mixing and nutrient transport in oceans is actually the kinetic mixing done by whales and fish. Not by 50%. So the whales, the carnivorous whales, they go deep, deep down, sometimes a mile deep, and they feed down there. And then they come up to the surface and release their feces and urine and bring like huge amounts of nutrients up to the surface if there's enough of them. And so that's one way that, and not also just like the physical diving and coming up of whales and fish too. Like when in a healthy ocean, I mean, the ocean is depleted of like at least half, but probably much, much more of the amount of fish there used to be. In one of the panels in this conference, Derek Jensen cited a study that a book actually that I've read as well about like how, I mean, you've heard these stories, how thick the salmon runs were. Like you could basically walk on the water, they were so thick. People would go fishing by dipping a basket in the water and you'd have enough fish to feed your entire clan. People would throw naked hooks into the ocean and you'd catch a fish in like 30 seconds. The cod shoals, the cod in around Newfoundland were so thick that ships couldn't even make progress. So yeah, the number of fish is way, so okay, so where was I going with that? Yeah, kinetic mixing. So, and then so the whales also transport nutrients from their feeding grounds to tropical areas and to what would otherwise be ocean deserts. And they give birth there and they hang out there and so they transfer nutrients. So I think probably, in this part I haven't found research, but that their communication network helps bring the nutrients to where they are needed most. They're taking care of the ocean. So I told this man, this kind of thinking and other things that were important to me. It was a get to know each other conversation, about the restoration of a healthy masculinity in this world. The transition out of patriarchy was something I might have talked about. My belief that our future political leadership will come from the prisons. Like all kinds of issues, and he finally got sick of it. He's like, Charles, one of these days, you're going to have to decide whether to be relevant or not. Sorry to break it to you, but unless you devote 100% of your energy to getting a meaningful carbon tax instituted as soon as possible within the shrinking window that we have left, then everything else you're doing is a waste of time. Because it's not going to matter if we abolish the prison industrial complex when the sea levels rise 50 feet. It doesn't matter if we're housing the homeless, and your interest in reviving dying languages, that's a total waste of time. What good could that do? And I went on in my mind, channeling Ebenezer Scrooge, to say that, like, some of these issues, like housing the homeless, rehabilitating homeless people, getting them back on their feet, like that's the life commitment of some people. That is actually making things worse, because homeless people are scavengers. They have a zero carbon footprint. But if you're going to make them into productive, consuming members of society, yeah. I mean, that's just taking this logic to its extreme. But what I want to illustrate, here is that the kind of thinking that this man exemplifies is called fundamentalism. It's called war thinking. It says that we have to do the one important thing. The enemy is at the gates. So the arts, civil liberties, everything else needs to be sacrificed for the cause. Because we're saving the world here. That logic might be valid if you actually understand the cause. There are situations where there is an acute threat to life, and you have to fight something in order to protect life. That does happen. You could have acute sepsis in your body. You could have, a ruffian could come and try to beat me up here on the stage. Like, that could happen. And if that were happening, and he were just totally crazy, then maybe we could physically intervene. Skeeter would come up and kick his ass. But look how often that logic is invoked in this culture. The specter of evil and the response pattern of finding something to fight, finding the one cause of the problem, the pathogen, the bacteria, the weed, the terrorist, the criminal, the Russians, Vladimir Putin, the bad guy. Now we know what to do. We kill it. We kill something. So, I became wary of this way of thinking, about climate change. The one thing that we can quantify and measure that is the solution to everything. And the more I learned about Earth as a living being, the more I came to believe that the carbon narrative is dangerously reductionistic. And it renders unimportant things that are actually very, very important. Because, like, what is the carbon contribution of rehabilitating a homeless person? Or what is the carbon contribution of salmon? It's hard to measure that. I don't think that the IPCC puts any value on it. But when you understand Earth as a living being, you understand, okay, this organ that we call the salmon has some kind of function that is ultimately going to affect however we choose to measure the health of the organism. And it turns out, actually, salmon bring a lot, at least when there's enough of them, they bring a lot of marine nutrients inland. Nitrogen especially, but other nutrients as well. They bring them upstream, and then bears come and eat the salmon, and eagles come and eat the salmon, and then they spread the poop all over the forest, so the forest becomes healthier. More resistant to disease, more resistant to fire, and therefore, is able to sequester more carbon if you want to look at it in those terms. But you can already see that there's a little bit of an uncomfortable reductionism here to value the salmon because, after all, they do contribute to carbon reduction. What about valuing them in their own right because they are sacred beings? Instead of instrumentalizing them, we should protect them because they do contribute to carbon. That's the same mentality as valuing them for their economic potential. It's a reduction in their sacredness. So, yeah, and it even's more complicated. Someone told me the other day that it's not just the salmon and the bears, it's the grizzly bears too. Because so the black bears come and they eat the salmon, but then they have to run away from the grizzly bears. So the grizzly bears ensure that the nutrients from the salmon get dispersed even farther into the forest. So we have a physiology as marvelously complex, or more complex, than the human body. They used to have these metabolic pathway charts that you would put on your wall if you were studying medicine or physiology or something. All of the metabolic pathways, and these charts and these feedback loops and all that. They can't have those anymore because the charts would cover this entire wall in like diamond point type. That's how complex a human physiology is. And imagine like a planet that is a physiology of physiologies of physiologies. So here's the simple understanding that I want to impart, and that this conference so energized and reinforced in me, which is that Earth is alive, its health depends on the health of its organs and its tissues. And if we continue to degrade those in the name of even sustainable development, if we continue to drain the wetlands, cut down the forests, fish out the oceans, extinguish the species, cover the land in monoculture farms, and pave it over in parking lots in cities, destroying its organs, the Earth will die a death of 1 million cuts. Even if we cut emissions to zero, even if we power the whole thing with clean energy. One thing that was really apparent in the conference, especially on this panel that I was on, called Ecosystem, what was it called? Ecosystem Restoration. Yes, Ecosystem Restoration for Climate. Something like that, yeah. It became clear the potential of, well, for one thing, there were these scientists who studied the hydrological cycle and stuff, and who basically make a strong case that a lot of what we blame on greenhouse gas emissions is actually caused by the degradation of the water cycle. Like, that stock photo of the cracked field, like if there's an article on climate change, usually there's this photo of a dried out, desertified, cracked field. That's not caused by global warming. That's caused by the tillage of the soil and the cutting down of trees so that the water no longer can penetrate and revive the aquifers and be held by the sponge of the living soil. When the soil is exposed and killed and all of its life is taken away and it's not covered with a skin of life, then the rain falls, it washes away the soil, the organic content of the soil oxidizes and becomes carbon dioxide into the air, and very soon it's dry and there's no more evaporation happening, because if there's plants and trees and living soil, the evaporation happens way after the rain that came from the ocean stops, and it feeds a continued water cycle. Professor Mian was saying something like 65% of rain in rainforests is just recycled rain. So it's actually a lot more convenient from the perspective of a developer to blame the fires, the droughts, the floods, and so forth on a global problem and not on what's actually happening right here. So there's good news and bad news here. I'm going to flip back and forth. good news is that the capacity, okay, so here's a principle. Life maintains the conditions for life. The capacity of living soil, trees, wetlands, if you want to talk about carbon, the capacity for them to sequester carbon is enormous. The Rodale Institute has figures based on the research that they do, you know, like actually measuring the stuff, that over 100% of current emissions could be drawn down annually by a change in our agricultural system. They're not even including afforestation and reforestation. So the potential for life to maintain atmospheric equilibrium is enormous. The bad news is that the living organs of a living planet that can do that are constantly being degraded. And it's getting worse and worse. The good news, then, again, is that they can be restored. And that's what was exciting about this conference. People, like I was taught in school that it takes 500 years to build an inch of topsoil. But there are people doing it in 1 year. They're building an inch of topsoil in 1 year. Places where springs have been dry for 30 years, they're bringing the springs back to life again. Rivers that are starting to flow again, and this is just on, these are just like small scale people with no funding, with no support. They're almost crazy for doing this. You don't make any money by revitalizing rivers, but they're doing it anyway. Imagine the healing that would be possible if we turned our collective creativity and energy toward healing the earth, toward healing the land. It's doable. It can happen fast. It's actually way easier than cutting fossil fuels or eliminating fossil fuels. Not that that's a bad idea. I'm not saying that carbon is not that CO2 is not a problem. When you have a weakened system, like imagine all of your organs are seriously degraded, then it's going to be a lot harder to meet any kind of challenge. And rising levels of greenhouse gases are just such a challenge. I don't think it would be a problem if we had, like there's half the number of trees that there used to be. The area of the world's deserts has expanded by something like 2/3 over the course of civilization. It's not supposed to be like that. You look at the globe with the band of desert that stretches all the way from Mongolia and the very east of Asia, all the way across the Gobi Desert, all the way across the Middle East, all the way across northern Africa, the entire Sahara, that like 7,000-mile band of dead and dying land, spreading now to Spain and Portugal. That isn't supposed to be there. That's new. That's only as old as civilization for the most part. And it came because of soil abuse and cutting down trees and basically this war against nature. So I just wish that we could devote even like 10% of the money that goes to renewable energy, some of which is actually causing more harm. A lot of it, like Vandana Shiva was telling me, I was at a conference with her, and she was saying, yeah, like the energy companies, they are totally okay with CO2 narrative right now. They are totally okay with the dominant narrative of climate change, and are investing heavily in alternative energy, biofuels, and carbon capture machines. So imagine a future where we continue to output all kinds of emissions and have giant machines everywhere that suck the carbon back down again. Then we can continue to strip mine and drill and frack and pipeline, because the CO2 is not a problem anymore. So they're investing in geoengineering and the biofuels plantations, which basically means that you destroy peasant agriculture, you destroy pristine ecosystems, and over 10 tens of millions of hectares in Africa and South America and Asia, you plant like jatropha trees, palm oil trees, eucalyptus trees, and convert them into fuel. It's happening in North America too. It's happening in Romania, like some of the oldest forests in Europe are being wood chipped. The Carolina swamp forests are being wood chipped and sent to, okay, maybe I should go back to, well, sent to power plants that then get carbon credits for burning down forests. So, and this is the danger of reductionistic thinking. This is the danger of making everything about one thing. And we don't have to do it that way. But the mindset underneath reductionistic thinking leads us to that kind of policy. When we don't see Earth as alive, when we see it as a collection of quantities, then we're going to act from that frame. How many people were here when I was speaking last time at the conference? Okay. I'm just like a little bit shy about repeating myself too much, you know?
Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Yeah. Mm. I know. I'm just standing here for a minute. Yeah, and I want to speak to the understanding that this crisis, the climate crisis, is an initiation for the human species, or shall we say at least an initiation for civilization. That the task before us is not to find another fuel source to continue things as before. That what we are searching for is not sustainability, to sustain what we have, to sustain growth. That's what the UN is talking about, sustainable growth, sustainable development. But that the initiation, the revolution, the metamorphosis that we are faced with includes everything. Our most basic myths and stories, who we think we are in the world, why we are here, all the way to the story of what is a self, what is real, and from that, what is important. The story that has dominated civilization for a long time, the story of separation, is growing old. The story that said who you are is a separate individual in a world of other, a soul encased in flesh, a mote of consciousness, looking out into the world, a bubble of psychology, confined in a flesh robot. In a world that is fundamentally other, a world of random forces, impersonal, mathematical forces, and competing other separate selves. That has been taken for granted more and more into the modern era, including by the climate policy establishment. This is the source code of civilization. If you take that for granted, that we are separate selves in a universe that does not have the qualities of a self, that is not conscious, not sentient, not intelligent, that doesn't have any inherent evolutionary direction, but it's random. If you take that for granted, then everything about our civilization is inevitable. The war on nature is inevitable because if it's just a bunch of random forces and competing other selves, then our well-being comes through dominating and controlling them. Insulating ourselves from the arbitrary forces of nature, out-competing the competitors, imposing intelligence onto a world that has none. That's our destiny, to become the masters of reality, the masters of the universe. That's all baked into the cake. A generation or two ago, some of you are old enough to remember this, that it was unproblematic to participate in this grand project of domination. What's the next exciting invention that's going to expand, that's going to bring us to the new frontier of space, of the atom, to extend our dominion further? That was exciting. The conquest of nature was not a bad word in 1950. And it was going to bring tremendous benefits. The end of all disease, the end of all suffering, as we applied the same engineering technologies to society that had been so successful in materiality. Social engineering, political science, economics, sociology. Yeah. Utopia was going to come through the advance of reason and science, the expansion of our control. So what this initiation is, it's showing us the delusion of that storyline, because we're not in that paradise. It's been promised and promised for so long. And even though there are some who try to demonstrate with statistics that we are better off than ever, Nicholas Kristof, Jared Diamond, Steven Pinker, we know that the world is supposed to be more beautiful, more intimate, relationships more authentic. We know that this isn't the way it's supposed to be. That we're not actually getting healthier and healthier as promised. Wealthier and wealthier. In the 80s, Alvin Toffler said the greatest problem facing humanity by the year 2000 will be what to do with all our leisure time. So, what we are discovering through the climate crisis, I like to call it the ecological crisis. What we are discovering is that what we do to the other, we do to ourselves. What we are discovering is that we are not actually separate from all of those things that we have relegated to the status of non-beings and of separate from ourselves. That they are not actually separate. That even if we insulate ourselves as best we can from the effects of industrial civilization, somehow those forces come back underneath the walls, underneath the fortress walls. That when something goes extinct in the world, something dies in ourselves as well. That the cutoff from our brethren, from our relations, that even allows us to wreak the damage that we do as a society, that cutoff leaves us alone, alienated, miserable. There's a violence that we do to ourselves in occupying the state of being necessary to enact violence on the rest. It's inescapable. That's the initiation that we're facing. In an initiation, one thing that happens is that you discover capacities that you didn't know that you had before. In a big initiation, the world falls apart. No longer do you understand who you are. Maybe some of you have gone through a life initiation like this. Who am I? What's real? How do I do this thing called life? That's happening to our society now as well. The old standbys, the old goals, the storyline, they don't make sense anymore. They don't inspire anymore. Who gives a shit about a manned mission to Mars? You know? But remember the moon landings and how that entranced, enchanted, engaged the entire population. The whole world was watching that. What a triumph. No one cares anymore about that. We're in between stories. And in a process of discovering who we are or who we will become, so yeah, in an initiation, there's a dissolution of an identity so that a new identity can form. Part of that new identity is a different answer to the question, why am I here? Someone going through an initiation into adulthood, part of that is that you come to understand your purpose. And no longer do you just play, but you devote the gifts that you developed in your playtime, in your childhood era, towards something that is beyond yourself, towards something meaningful. So here we have humanity having played around with our gifts for a long time, now coming to the realization that childhood is over, and that the mother who enabled us to play with these gifts and who gave and gave and gave to us can give no more. So, and is no longer giving willingly. Gaia used to give willingly all of the materials for industrial civilization. Seams of iron ore and metals that were just thrust up out of the earth. Oil that you would just prick the ground and there'd be a gusher. You know, it was like here, here, here. Now we have to force it out. We have to pump water down into the ground and smash the rocks to extract from an unwilling, depleted, exhausted giver. So that relationship is over. And a new relationship is waiting for us, inviting us at the other side of this initiation. In this kind of initiation, excuse me, in this kind of an initiation, our habitual ways of doing things no longer serve. Our ways of attacking a problem don't work anymore. The find the enemy approach to problem solving, war, doesn't work anymore. It doesn't even work to achieve the objectives of the power elite. Like the wars aren't working anymore. You can't win anymore. Medicine is unable to find pathogens now to solve the diseases of our time, which are more and more autoimmune diseases. Like there's nothing to fight in an autoimmune disease. So medicine doesn't know what to do. The same things happen in the fight against crime. That the more we fight it, the more crime there is. Probably because when you lock up a quarter of the population in, some environment, some urban environment and ship off all the black teenagers to jail, you know, like, and the fathers and the ruined families then generate even more crime. I mean, this is not like some mysterious principle. Anyway, so the collapse of our story, the failure to redeem technological utopia, it's bringing the dominant civilization to a point of humiliation, which is a good thing. Humiliation brings humility. Humility brings the willingness to ask, to know that we don't know, to be open to, to be open to another story, another account of what's real, and another account of how the world works. I want to say one more thing about initiation, which is that at a certain point in an initiatory process of this kind, there's a key moment in which it seems totally hopeless, in which it seems you cannot possibly make it through this initiation. The reason for that is that at that moment you are still relying on the understanding of possibility that you are being initiated out of. You are still relying on the capacities that you already had, the methods of problem solving, the story that you already had. You're still relying on that. And that solution set cannot get you out of the dilemma. That's the situation that we're in right now as a society. It seems utterly hopeless. From a new story, from a new understanding, from the understanding of interbeing, from the understanding of we are not the only fully conscious, intelligent, sacred beings on this earth, from the understanding of a living, sacred earth, it's not hopeless anymore. When we start asking, earth, what do you want? Land, place, what do you want? Soil, what do you want? Whales, what do you want? How can we serve you? When we understand that earth is alive, we ask different questions. And it becomes about participating in an intelligence larger than ourselves. That intelligence and that order can produce what we would call miracles. And some of the earth repair folks who have been presenting at this conference, they are like producing miracles. Things that are inconceivable from, say, standard agronomy. So basically what I'm saying is that the despair that so many people feel when faced with the ecological crisis, faced with climate change, that's based on the same premises that the crisis comes from. We have to understand that the world doesn't work the way that we thought it did. I've talked to indigenous people about climate change. A lot of them pretty much accept the dominant narrative, but a lot of them don't. I've heard Amazonian indigenous people say that the real problem is that you're taking the metals away from underneath the ground in the tropics and shipping them off to the temperate zones. These are part of the Earth's energy system. And the climate will become deranged if you move those metals. I've heard others say that climate change is caused by taking the gold out of the mountains, because the gold is the heart of the mountain. And without its heart, how can it properly administer the continent? I've heard a Zuni man say that if you don't allow the rivers to reach the sea, but you take all the water for irrigation, and you destroy he didn't use the word hydrological cycle, but if you don't honor the water, then how can it ever carry the information to the ocean about what the land needs? So this is what I'm talking about, the story that Earth is alive. This is not actually a new story. It's only new for civilization, but it's really a very ancient story held by cultures of memory on this earth. And it leads to a whole different causality, and you look for different things. And when you look for different things, you see different things. And when you see different things, you can serve different things. Like, as I looked for the whales and what they serve. When you say, oh yeah, this is an organ, then you know that it must be important, even if you don't initially know why, but you start looking for it. The beavers, you know that they're important. Initially, maybe you don't understand why. But the folks reintroducing beavers, like the effect on the climate that beavers have is just mind-boggling. You know, like the whole landscape of most of this continent, you look today on maps and there's all these little streams that flow into bigger streams, that flow into bigger streams, that flow into rivers and so forth. It didn't used to be like that. There weren't streams. There were necklaces of beaver ponds, 5 or 10 per mile, that created vast wetlands that were sponges for water. There weren't floods like we have today because the beaver dams slowed the water so much that just as artificial dams are supposed to do, they slowed the water so much that you didn't have floods like we do today. The water had time to sink down into the water table and come out as springs when the water was ready to come out. I mean, there's a whole other dimension when you see water as alive and conscious and as a being. And you go into Victor Schauberger kind of thinking, like it's just a reference that some of you may be familiar with. Like there's like a whole other universe that opens up when you start seeing the world as a being. And that seeing gives us access to therapeutic practices that are otherwise invisible. Or if they're visible, they're not they don't have as much of a motivation. So, yeah. So I've kind of been a little scattered here, but I want to translate this now into environmental policy priorities. Like what comes from the Living Earth view. So I'm going to state 4 priorities that will be rather outrageous from the mainstream perspective. So much so that sometimes people try to deplatform me from conferences because I'm a climate denier. Which basically is an indication of how polarized, I mean, this is a whole other phenomenon, the polarization of society. Which side are you on? And if you say something that doesn't obviously fit our side, you must be on the other side because you're going to provide them ammunition for their narrative. Anyway, with that disclaimer, I will say, it's like really hot in here. I see people yawning. Am I being like too lectury here? Too preachy? No?
The heat's on.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, so first priority from the Living Earth perspective is to protect any pristine ecosystems that still exist. First and foremost, the Amazon and the Congo, and many other smaller ones all around the world. And that includes the cultures that live with them and know how to take care of them, and are actually part of them, and were born from them, which is true at the same time as it's true that they emigrated there tens of thousands of years ago. They were also brought in by them and born from them. Their culture, their rituals, their language even, is part of that ecosystem. So yes, to preserve these intact organs where there is still health, where Gaia's memory of health is still intact. If those stay intact, then that memory of what full health is is still there. It can radiate out, and there will always be hope for healing as long as we protect those places. And that's why that's first priority. Not to mention, I mean, like in the case of the Amazon, how the Amazon basically anchors the entire global climate through its biotic pump function, which I'm not going to go into right now, but this is some of the stuff that was part of this conference. Like this isn't just my poetic metaphor that the Amazon is an organ. Like you can actually, there are people actually describing this physiology, how the Amazon is responsible for the transport of moisture all over the place. And the Amazon itself then depending on nutrient transport by megafauna and by birds. So you destroy the fish, the Amazon suffers. The mechanistic mind is like, how could that be? What do the fish have to do with the Amazon? But the food chain that results in migratory birds carrying ocean nutrients over the Amazon, like that's part of the whole thing too. Anyway, that was first priority. Second priority is to regenerate, heal, and restore all that has been damaged. And this is a close second place, in my view. So this means reforestation, it means regenerative agriculture, healing soil, healing water, healing trees. And again, to do that, it's not something that you can do from a mechanistic paradigm. You can't just have drones plant tree seeds or do it on scale. Scale is part of the problem too. To scale something up means you have to have a standard procedure that is applied in a formulaic way. But what really needs to happen is the restoration of intimate relationships with place. Because how do you know? How do you know what tree is supposed to go right there if you haven't been part of this place and observing its cycles for years or decades or probably generations? How do you know? How do you know to take care of these beings? So anyway, we learn by trying, and we're going to make mistakes and plant the wrong tree and observe the results. But that's okay as long as we are observing. And to observe it, again, you have to look for it. You have to relate to it as a being, and then you will see. So regenerative agriculture, and you can justify that from a carbon perspective, the sequestration and carbon storage and stuff like that. But if you make it only about that, then you are devaluing how important it is. You cannot encompass the entire value of an organ by, how much insulin it produces or how much sugar it produces or something like that. Like they have multiple functions. So, yeah, I just wanted to add that caution. If you value a forest according to the kilotons of CO2 that it will sequester over a year, then you are implicitly saying it's only worth that. And therefore you can cut it down and offset that by covering that forest where that forest used to be with solar panels. In fact, that's actually happening. Yeah, in some places forests are cut down to put solar panels there, and the electricity from the solar panels is bigger than the carbon that was being sequestered by the forest, so it's worth it. That's the kind of thing that happens when you reduce the sacred to a quantity. Okay, so that's second priority, to restore the organs that have been degraded. Third priority is to stop dousing the planet in poison. Which damages it on the level of tissues, maybe not organs but tissues. So we have today an insect apocalypse. Something like a 75%, 80% decline in insect biomass. There was that prominent study in Germany that documented that over 30 years. And they don't understand why. And it's happening everywhere. Do you remember when you were kids, the bug splatter on the windshield? Yeah. What happened to the bug splatter? Yeah. I thought that might have been my imagination until I saw these studies. And then I asked my dad, and he's like, yeah, you know, now that you mention it, when I was a kid, we would have to drive slow at night and turn on the windshield wipers. That's how many bugs there were. You guys remember that? This isn't your imagination. Yeah, this is way, way more concerning to me than global warming and increasing temperatures. Yeah. Insects are the foundation of the entire terrestrial food chain. You know, they are like the cells. They are the tissues of this organism. And why is this happening? Boy, wouldn't it be great if we could blame that on greenhouse gases too? Global warming, the cause of everything. And you hear that a lot in the news. The cause of the refugee crisis. Actually, the cause of the refugee, well, the whole idea of the cause, that's part of the problem too, to find the cause. What's the cause of colony collapse disorder in the bees? Is there the cause? Paul Stamets thinks that maybe the cause is the decline of bears, because they scratch the trees and then a certain fungus grows on the sap from the tree scratches, and that fungus has antiviral compounds that the bees are attracted to. Like he has pictures of bees swarming over these fungi that grow on the trees that the bears scratch. And then he like uses compounds from those fungi to treat colony collapse disorder. So maybe that's the cause is the bees, but maybe they'd be okay, they would be able to survive that if it weren't for all the neonicotinoid insecticides. And maybe they'd be able to survive both of those if it weren't for modern beekeeping practices that kill all the drones. Because the drones are useless, right? You can't measure their productivity. Actually, the drones, they can, like if a worker bee goes to another hive, the guard bees will kill her. Because sometimes bees try to steal each other's honey. But the drones are allowed in. And they actually help with one of their important tasks, which is to sing to the larva. The drones, they sing to the larva. So they go to other hives and they help sing, and then they bring the news back from the other hives. They're part of a hive of hives. This is, how many beekeepers know about this even? I read this in a book called Song of Increase. You know that book? Yeah, awesome book. And out there, the woman channels bees, It's not only that she's an observant scientist. Yeah, and so that's the kind of thing that you don't look for unless you're of the mind that Earth is alive and all beings are alive and intelligent. Then you start seeing that kind of stuff everywhere, and you're no longer alone here. So the cause is a problem. So no one knows the cause of the insect decline. Wouldn't it be nice if it were global warming? Then we know what to do. The one thing that solves every problem, just like what? The one thing, if you had enough of it, all your problems would be solved. Yeah, it's the same kind of thinking. It's the same kind of reductionistic thinking. The translation of values into value. You can see how deep this pattern goes and how deep the revolution is that we are involved in today. So the researchers in Germany, they actually documented that insect populations recovered a little bit in warm years. So they said, warming isn't the problem here. And they theorized that maybe it is the insecticides. Yeah, really? Maybe. But it might not. It might be more complicated than that. It might be the wolves. It might be the decline of the wolves. What does that do to forest ecology? When the deer overpopulate and eat all the shrubs and destroy the understory, which gives less habitat to ground birds, who knows what we're messing with here. When we douse the entire East Coast, my entire childhood, every year was sprayed for gypsy moth caterpillars. We saw the plains, the entire East Coast. It's happening still to combat Zika in Florida. So pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, antibiotic runoff, fertilizer runoff, pharmaceutical waste, sunscreen, chemotherapy waste, all the pharmaceutical waste, toxic waste, radioactive waste. I mean, I could go into electromagnetic pollution. Like we gotta stop poisoning this world. So that's the third priority. Fourth priority is to cut fossil fuel emissions. Boy, and that's a distant fourth. But in case you're outraged, notice that will be an inevitable side effect of the first three priorities. Because if you are holding every piece of land sacred and not destroying pristine ecosystems, which is priority one, and regenerating and healing land, which is priority two, sorry, no more offshore oil drilling, definitely no more Alberta tar sands excavation. I mean, you've seen the destruction there. No more fracking, no more pipelines, no more mountaintop removal, none of that. You don't even need climate grounds. And in fact, my opposition to those things isn't because of climate change. I was opposed to them before climate change was even a thing. I remember the strip mines in Pennsylvania where I grew up. They were horrible. And would you change your attitude if global warming stopped and the skeptics were right and the solar minimum ushers in an age of cooling? Would you be like, okay, fine, fracking's fine, all tar sands fine, pipelines, drill baby drill? Is that what you would do? No, because that's not the real reason. The real reason is that this earth is sacred and we love her, and we don't want to damage her anymore. So, yeah, and here's an opportunity to reach across the political divide. And in fact, there are people out there doing that right now. One person told me about her brother who voted for Trump, doesn't believe in climate change, and has switched to holistic grazing, and is sequestering enormous amounts of carbon, building topsoil, and he can drink the water again on his farm, which is, most of the water, groundwater in the high plains is undrinkable now. The well that great-granddad dug for the farm, can't drink out of that anymore, and the soil's dead. These farmers are crying for help, committing suicide. It's not just in India where there's farmer suicide. So, yeah, let's question the utility of this polarizing narrative. Do we really need it? So, yeah. I mean, when climate change first became a concept, or when I first became aware of it in the 80s, I'm repeating myself here for another night, but I was like, good. Now they'll have to do what I've always wanted them to do. Now I'll be able to use their own language, the language of fear, the language of self-interest, to give them a reason why they should stop the mining and the drilling. Now they're going to have to do it. I think we are ceding sacred ground by shifting the conversation onto self-interest. And we are strengthening the field of self-interest. We are validating, by saying, stop it or bad things will happen to us, you're also saying, if bad things won't happen to us, then don't stop it. You're saying, if somebody else is going to make the changes, then why should I? Why should this city? Why should this country? Because the other ones are going to do it, so bad things aren't going to happen to us. But when you think in terms of bad things happening to this forest, to this field, to this place where I grew up, to this stream, then you can't escape it anymore. That's called love. When the well-being of another is your happiness too. When its pain is your pain, that's love. That's where we need to go. That's why we need a story that holds the world as alive and therefore lovable. Like, what if I said, here's my cell phone. I love my cell phone. It's not just that it's useful to me. I love it. I'm going to tuck it in at night and take care of it, you know? You'd think I was crazy. If we have an ideology that says a tree is just a bunch of woody tissue and a stream is a bunch of random H2O, and the world is an arrangement of chemistry, then it's just as insane to love those things. It's not practical. And so we seed that ground and say, okay, let's talk the language of policy, the costs and the benefits to us. Well, what if the best profit maximization plan is to continue the extraction and to create a world that's been converted into one gigantic strip mine and waste dump, where we live in bubble cities, climate-controlled bubble cities, with a sky bleached white with sulfur aerosols to reflect heat to maintain a suitable climate, with algae pools to make oxygen, where the only animals left are livestock, where nature's gone. And GDP has been rising every year because we've produced so many more goods and services from the dead nature. What if we could do that? Can you see that as a possible future? Maybe it's not possible. Maybe we would face collapse because we cannot replace all of nature with technology, but maybe we can. If we can, should we? If we shouldn't, why not? We have to have a reason besides self-interest as it is constituted in the current economic and political discourse. We have to appeal to another reason. I don't think, this is just my gut feeling, I don't think that extinction is going to save us. I don't think that ecological collapse is going to save us from ourselves. I don't think that we're going to have to change now. That's not metaphysically valid. We have a choice. It's not that we have to change. Wrong narrative. It's that we want to change.
Ooh.
It's not that we have to change to survive. Survival isn't the issue. What if it isn't the issue? What if the issue is, what world do we want to live in? What world do we serve? I will end with a story. I spoke of Mother Earth and the initiation. You know, one thing that happens in an initiation into adulthood is that you fall in love. When you become an adult, a different kind of love is available. That's not about taking, receiving. The love of a child for a parent is based on receiving. It starts with nursing, with food. And it's appropriate. I don't want my kids to pay me back. They don't receive a bill when they turn 18 for services rendered. It's a gift. Romantic love is different. You want to give and receive if you're a mature person. Maybe some people are just like overgrown babies and they're still in an infantile relationship with their spouse, but maybe you've met some of these people. But a mature person wants to give and receive and wants to co-create. Maybe the maturation of civilization is into that relationship with Earth, to give and receive and to create together. So, a little story. Once upon a time, there was a planet, and its spirit was called Gaia, Mother Earth. And she gave and gave and gave until she could give no more. And she came to her children and she said, I'm dying, and it's too late to save me. And without an animating feminine spirit, all life on earth will die. Whether or not you survive, all life will die, the planet will die, and I am departing. The only chance for the world to burst back into life and become what it was and more is for a new feminine spirit to inhabit it. And this spirit will no longer be your mother. This spirit will be your lover. She's waiting. She's in love with you already, and she wants to come. But she will not come without a courtship. She will not come if she does not know that you are a good partner. To demonstrate that, you must be in service to life. You must demonstrate that you are ready to give as well as to receive. How do you do that? It's by every choice that you make that is in service to life. Whether that choice makes sense in the carbon narrative, or whether it is service to some small invisible being, an old man on his deathbed, and your service to life is to bring forgiveness to that moment. Each one of those acts is a prayer. It is a declaration of what world do we want to live in. The loudest prayers are the ones that take the form of action, that demonstrate, here is my choice. Those acts are the acts of courtship that says to that feminine spirit who's waiting to come, we will love you well. And what will be born of that union is beautiful beyond imagining. So thank you for joining me in this courtship. Of Mother Earth.